What's up guys, Roman from RNS Entertainment. In this video I'm going to be doing an in-depth character spotlight on Tyreese from The Walking Dead. This video is going to be an in-depth analysis of Tyrese's entire run in the comic book series, so if you haven't read them and don't want to know what happens, there are going to be major spoilers from his entire time in the series. I will be talking about the TV show version of Tyrese at certain points in the video, but this is going to mainly focus on comic Tyrese. He was a lot bigger of a character in the comics, he was there right from the beginning, and he really was the right-hand man that the series needed after Shane died. If you haven't read any of the comic books and you've only seen the show, you probably don't know where I'm coming from connecting these two characters. They were separated by a wide berth in the show, and they were never really mentioned in any sort of similar capacity. But in the comic books, Tyreese is introduced in issue number 7. Literally the issue right after Shane was killed by Carl after going crazy and attacking Rick in the woods. There are a number of other connections between Shane and Tyreese in the comic book. They're very intentional. In the comic book, Shane was not around very long. He advanced to that craziness very quickly and attacked Rick, blew up, and we didn't get to really see any of their friendship, any of that good brother storyline that we had season 2 in the show. Instead, Tyreese shows up very early on in the series, issue number 7, and he takes up Shane's role as right-hand man to Rick. They have that whole brother relationship over the course of the comic book series. They become fast friends, they're brothers in arms, they are always fighting together, and really at this point we didn't have anybody in the group who could hold their own against zombies but Rick and Tyreese. So him coming along was both filling of a power vacuum that the group needed and filling that role of best friend to Rick. Tyreese makes his first appearance in the comics right after Shane is killed and buried. It's Christmas Eve, although Rick wants to keep everybody from finding out that it's Christmas. After all the shit they've been through, they really can't deal with explaining to the kids why Santa isn't bringing them any presents. They end up getting stopped on the road by several cars in their way, and they're approached by several figures out of the darkness. It turns out to be Tyreese, his daughter Julie, and her boyfriend Chris. So they've been holed up together. Tyreese has basically been taking care of their little group. There is a 6-page Tyreese special, which was a special little edition of the comic book released solely for him, showing us how he got his signature hammer, and I am going to be going over that at the end of this character spotlight. Rick shares some food with Tyreese and his group and offers them a spot to sleep in the RV with his group. Tyreese makes an excuse that the kids aren't comfortable around strangers to sleep separately, and the next morning him and Rick have a conversation where he tells them that he basically made that excuse not knowing if Rick and them were a group of cannibals, which, you know, not yet. The hunters come later. This is basically Rick and Tyreese introducing themselves to each other, talking about how the zombie apocalypse affects people's minds. That's a big thing in the comic books, is the psychological aspect of it. People going crazy, people reacting to it in different ways. Rick tells Tyreese about Shane freaking out and trying to kill him. Tyreese tells Rick about this old man that he knew from before the apocalypse that tried to rape his daughter and that he beat to death. And they end up getting to the point where Tyreese tells him that he doesn't feel bad about doing it. The Tyreese in the comic books is really like that. He doesn't have remorse for his actions. Even when he does really hardcore things, he does them with conviction, and he moves on and does what he needs to do. Their conversation is cut short by several zombies approaching. Him and Tyreese fight zombies for the first time together. This becomes a very common thing, as at this point, Rick and Tyreese are the only people capable of holding their own in a fight. Everybody else is more of a liability than anything. This is before people have trained much. This is before anybody was really good with weapons or had any weapons, so it's really good to have a melee fighter and a strong person like Tyreese in the group. He quickly finds his place. Everybody recognizes how useful he is right away. He helps them clear the cars out of the way. Him and Carol instantly are attracted to each other. They flirt a little bit by the campfire. Tyreese kind of makes a move. So of course him, Julie, and Chris accompany Rick and their group moving forward. The first place they stop is Wiltshire Estates, a gated neighborhood that Rick and the group hope to move into and set up homes in, as well as scavenge as much food and supplies as they can from the surrounding neighborhood. This is very short-lived, but we do get some cool stuff with Tyreese here. He ends up tackling a zombie off of Rick, saving his life. He's like, "I got your back, man." They fight off a few zombies together, and we find out that Tyreese is a former NFL player for the Atlanta Falcons. He played professional football for 2 years before getting an injury trying to go for the glory, pushing himself a little too hard, and ended up taking a job as a bouncer, a few odd jobs, and a car salesman job until the zombie apocalypse started. Things in Wiltshire quickly go bad as one of the group is killed by zombies and another one of the group signals an entire horde of zombies from the surrounding neighborhood. The group is forced to retreat from their first attempt at a home, and Tyreese goes back after Julie and Chris, who are trying to have sex in the upper floor of one of the houses. Rick goes after Tyreese, risking his life to do so, and they end up climbing out onto the top of the RV that Dale is driving and hauling it out of Wiltshire. Food ends up getting scarce at this point, and Rick and Tyreese go on a hunting trip, exactly like the hunting trip that him and Shane and Carl went on in the show, and they witness Carl get shot by Otis. Rick freaks out and he's about to kill Otis right there. Tyreese convinces him not to when he sees that Carl is still alive. The group ends up getting set up at Hershel's farm, and we even get to see a nice moment between Tyreese and Carl where he made sure to keep Carl's hat safe for him. Tyreese ends up coming across Julie and Chris about to have sex again, and we see her boyfriend Chris acting very creepy, talking about them being together for eternity. They're talking about waiting till the right moment. So basically they have a murder-suicide pact with each other. They plan to have sex for the first time and then kill each other so that they don't have to deal with the zombie apocalypse and so that they can be together forever. This is another one of those examples of people going completely batshit insane in the zombie apocalypse. When Rick ends up finding out about Hershel keeping zombies in the barn, he reacts exactly the same way Shane did in the show. He wanted to bust the barn open, he wanted to kill all of the zombies right there, and Tyreese was actually the voice of reason telling him to calm down and play by Hershel's rules. I don't necessarily consider that the voice of reason, but it's what most people would say, you know. Rick later convinces Tyreese to let Julie and Chris learn to shoot a firearm and go to target practice. During this time, Hershel's whole fiasco with the barn busting open, killing his family, all of this catastrophic shit goes down, and in the chaos, Rick forgets to take the guns back from the kids. Tyreese ends up letting them keep them after seeing an entire family get massacred by zombies. He wants them to be able to protect themselves. This inadvertently takes them a step closer to their whole murder-suicide pact though. We see them talking about how it's going to make things easier, and yeah, this is not going to end well. During this time, things advance with Tyreese and Carol. They're basically dating at this point, they're all over each other. After things go south with Hershel and they get kicked off of the farm, they come across the prison. Tyreese and Rick decide to go in and take out as many zombies as they can. They essentially are going to clear the entire yard by themselves. They've got Andrea in there just as backup. They don't want to fire as many shots as possible to avoid drawing larger numbers of zombies from inside the prison. So think about how many people were clearing the yard in the show. I mean, you had Glenn and Maggie and Daryl and Carol and Rick and Carl and all of these people clearing out that yard, and it still seemed pretty impressive. But in the comics, it was only Rick and Tyreese and Andrea. So while everybody's waiting for Rick and Tyreese to go in and clear out the inner parts of the prison, we get to see a conversation between Carol and Lori talking about the new life that Carol wants to have. She says that things are almost better now, that Tyreese is better than her husband ever was, and that they could set up this whole new life in the prison. Lori is skeptical, as she should be. I hate to back up Lori on anything, but this is definitely foreshadowing how things are not going to end up great for Carol. So yeah, Rick and Tyreese by themselves, Rick basically insists that it's just them two, go into the inner parts of the prison. They find the cell block that the survivors end up staying in. They have a conversation about Rick still being startled and frightened by the zombies, and Tyreese having gotten over that long ago. Eventually, they come across the cafeteria, bust open the doors, and find the prisoners inside. This is really funny. One of them's just like, hey, you guys want some meatloaf? So eventually, Chris and Julie find enough alone time to have sex, and then they attempt their double murder-suicide. But Julie doesn't pull the trigger in time, and the guy basically just shoots and kills her. Tyreese comes in and finds her and freaks out. Of course, he blames the kid, and he's sitting there waiting for her to come back as a zombie. This is a really big moment because in the comics, they never went to the CDC. This is the first time that they ever witness somebody come back as a zombie without being bitten by a zombie. She reanimates in his arms and attacks him, and Chris ends up shooting her. Tyrese goes after Chris, strangles him to death, and then demands that Rick leave him be so that he could wait for Chris to come back as a zombie and kill him slower this time. Rick comes out and he is just haunted by what he's seen. He explains to the other survivors what happened. And that night we see him lie awake as he realizes that Shane has also reanimated as a zombie. The next day he finds Tyreese having burned the bodies himself. He sees that Tyreese is handling it in a very strange way. He's got a calm smile on his face. It's all about getting stuff done, and he's like, "I'm fine, Rick." And so I think this really terrifies Rick a lot more than if Tyreese was freaking out and getting angry at him. Rick takes off on a motorcycle. He doesn't tell anyone where he's going, but he ends up going to Shane's grave to dig him up and kill the zombified version of him. This is overlaid with Tyreese gathering together Glenn and Andrea and Billy to go clear out the gym, which has been full of zombies. This is the scene in the comics where Tyreese goes crazy with his hammer and ends up committing an almost superhuman act of badassery when he takes out every single zombie in this gym by himself with his hammer without getting bitten. There was a version of this in the show. After the car crashed and Daryl and them escaped, Tyreese went all rage mode and took out a lot of the zombies with his hammer. It cut away and then we see him stumbling out of the forest without getting bit. That was pretty impressive, but honestly the scene in the comics is a lot crazier. They're locked in this one room, and there is almost no way he could have survived this. They make their way into the gym, and almost immediately Tyreese goes off on his own. His happy demeanor is gone. It was the calm before the storm. He ends up going into this almost trance-like state, just fighting the zombies. He gets surrounded by them. Andrea's freaking out. Glenn drags her away screaming, and they run out of there. Andrea's got tears streaming down her face. They just know that Tyreese is dead. There is no way from their perspective that he's surviving. Later on, we see Carol just destroyed by this, and this is the first instance of Carol's deteriorating mental state. She just starts making out with Lori, and yeah, so this is just when she thinks Tyreese is dead. Things get a lot worse from here with old Carol. When Rick gets back, everybody tells him that Tyreese is dead, and he refuses to believe it until he sees a body. They open up the doors, and Tyreese is just calmly sitting there with body parts thrown around everywhere, just blood all over him and the walls, and he's just like, "Rick, you're back. What kept you, buddy?"